Here's Johnny.
I'll be back.
And you will know my name is the Lord.
I'm walking here.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Groovy.
Hello and welcome to Box Office Pulp, your one-stop podcast for movies, madness, and moxie. I'm your host, Cody, and joining me today are my co-host, Mike. Say hello, Mike.
I am the Demons.
And Jamie. Say hello, Jamie.
I have never felt more seen by a documentary than when, about 4 hours in, we started gushing about how fun the jetpack play in Tribes can be. It's like, my people. Seriously, Tribes was gushed about lovingly. Held on the same plateau as Half-Life 2.
To back up slightly, today's episode is actually about, you guessed it, first-person shooters. More specifically, today we're reviewing the latest Creator VC project, First Person Shooter, the definitive FPS documentary. The digital release for this is going to be August 31st. Physical copies are expected to ship out September 30th. And you have until the end of day, August 1st, to back the project and get a limited edition numbered physical copy personalized with your name in the credits, if that's your jam. Do you think they'll send me a copy for telling people exactly how to buy these? I know I'm supposed to be doing the review here, but they didn't give me.
That's all I could think while you were doing it. Does this all mean we're going to get copies? No, nobody likes us.
Please, payola us. Payola.
They did give us a review copy, so that was nice. For people that aren't familiar with the different Creator VC projects, they're the group behind In Search of the Last Action Hero, In Search of Darkness 1, 2, and 3, In Search of Tomorrow, which is, I believe, upcoming, and then there's also going to be an In Search of Darkness 90s edition. So all of their documentaries are these really long form, multiple hour, 4+ hour looks at a wide span, kind of an era. In this case, it's the entire history of first-person shooters. It's not like they looked at just Doom. It's not like they looked just at the 80s or 90s or the glut of World War II first-person shooters. This is the entire history covered over 4.5 hours. So it is very extensive. I feel like I learned a lot and then immediately forgot it because my memory's awful. But there was a lot of new facts presented.
I know a fuck ton, a useless amount of information about video games and particular first-person shooters, but it was still cool to discover things I never knew about, like the Colony or the things that came before Wolfenstein 3D. That
was a big, really pleasant surprise, too. The Colony was fascinating. I had never heard of any of that.
Yeah, I really want to play that.
Did you guys end up making a list of games to go check out when you're done with the documentary? Oh shit, I need to go replay Time Splitters now.
I just ended up wanting to replay Doom again.
How long does it take to play through Doom in one sitting? I don't know if I've ever done it. I always play a level or two and then get distracted and walk off.
What difficulty?
I'm a little baby man, so the easiest one.
45 minutes if you're, not going super fast.
I'd probably get lost a lot and stuck in some of the corners where it gets too dark.
Oh, that's how Doom 64 feels as long as it does.
I bought Doom 64 for my Switch, and a couple levels in, I basically got stuck and lost it. I'm like, this was fun. I'm gonna change games now.
Oh,
they have
Cody,
the ability
you're
to
playing the
brighten
lightened version.
I know, yeah. I saw screen caps like the original. I'm like, how did anyone ever play this?
Imagine playing that on a tube TV with a bad RCA cable. Somehow we made tube.
That's what made that game terrifying. It was like Skinamarink.
Not everything is Skinamarink, Mike.
Let me make everything Skinamarink.
So this documentary is 4.5 hours long. It never once shows a human being. It's just footage of first-person hallways, ceilings, floors. No, it is nothing like Skinamarink. Take that out of your minds, viewers at home.
Put that on the box.
Absolutely
like none of this is in this house.
9 out of 10. In this house, we only use first-person view. But yeah, for the history, I really love that. Jamie kind of had a good point where the first hour and a half of this documentary really focuses heavily on id Software. It's more about them than anything else, I would say, for the first third of the documentary, which is cool because they have a lot of the personalities there to interview. So you get to see Romero and all those other guys and actually have their takes on these things when they're kind of revolutionizing video gaming. And for me, this was like, I was aware of it vaguely, but I didn't know most of the facts or details. So it's really exciting to actually get to hear the history of it.
Yeah, it was a really good protraction of the whole story of id, because God, you could probably make a 4-hour documentary just on Carmack and Romero. Right? Like how much stuff went down. Like, oh God, if anyone out there still hasn't read Masters of Doom, it's a classic for a reason. Like the story of id Software is riveting. And they did a pretty good job of like boiling it down to like the key moments. And what I love about id and the creation of Doom is all of those guys are still around, still remember everything, and want to be interviewed as much as possible.
They
So
really
it's not
enjoy
like-
talking about it. Yeah.
It's not like trying to find the history of talking heads where it's like, well, you can talk to David Byrne, and that's about it. I'm very happy how heavily documented that particular chapter of video game history is.
Yeah, and from the id side too, there's a lot of interviews with John Romero. We've got John Carmack, Tom Hall is in there, so you get pretty extensive time with these guys. Who else do we have? Run through their list now. They've got Scott Miller, Warren Spector, Dave Oshry. Who am I forgetting? I think those are the big names, right? I want to know more about Maze Wars. Why did they spend 3 hours on Maze Wars?
I did not know Maze War was a thing that existed, and I don't know why it's not talked about more.
I could have watched an entire documentary that was just on the history of proto shooters and really proto games in general. Because God, everyone kind of gets the shorthand of, oh, well, video games began with Pong and Asteroids and then moved on to Pac-Man, and then Nintendo came into town. There was like a good stretch of time between like the early 70s and the early 80s where there were all of these games that weren't quite games being developed in labs and college campuses just as experiments by people who would later like go on to work at NASA and shit.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the
the idea
line
of,
between
hey, we
what
want
is and isn't
multiplayer and oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying the line between what is and isn't a game and what is and isn't in a particular genre is super fuzzy. It's like no one can even agree on what the first video game is because at a certain point it gets so fuzzy and so experimental.
Yeah, there was a lot of experiments we've all like come to understand. I think the thing that blew me away with Maze War and The Colony specifically is we've all heard the story, and they didn't go into it in the documentary because the documentary is not about graphics or anything. So how Doom faked being a 3D first-person game has been very well documented, but seeing that in this proto form in the 70s was very weird, and I just did not expect to see like any version of that pre-Doom or pre-Wolfenstein rather.
Yeah, and in an industry that often falls victim to the whole great man fallacy, where we like to sometimes think, oh, well, this thing couldn't possibly existed until somebody like John Carmack came up to it. That is like a slap in the face that reminds you, oh, all of this stuff is just there waiting to be discovered. And sometimes this stuff gets discovered in a lab and somebody goes, huh, that's fun, and then forgets about it for 40 years.
I was really fast because in my mind, the main thrust of a first-person shooter is shooting your friends. It's all about the multiplayer. And so I didn't realize that all the way back to something like Maze Wars, they had multiplayer. They actually had different terminals that were connecting to each other so they could play these games. And that was the appeal. You could actually have other people watch your progress, viewing parties, like proto esports, like they say in the documentary. That's the stuff that fascinates me, kind of that sociology element to it where, sure, stuff like System Shock is really interesting where you actually have a narrative and a game you play through in a first-person shooter. But the draw of putting people together in a room where all they want to do is shoot the hell out of each other is always fascinating to me.
And it's a cycle that repeats itself throughout the history of gaming. I mean, the Doom crew got so involved in death matches while making Doom that Romero eventually started becoming more famous on the competitive gaming circuit than actually being a game developer. It's one of the reasons he didn't work more on Quake. Like, he was becoming a celebrity in that world because he enjoyed he enjoyed fragging people in the id offices so much. Hell, GoldenEye has multiplayer, as we saw, just because the developers liked it and didn't even think about releasing that as a product.
It's also like the different like waves that come in like the FPS genre. I never really noticed that it always kind of repeats itself in the same way in regards to like how story goes, where it becomes very deathmatchy, very arena shooter kind of thing. And then something comes out that is incredibly narrative focused. So you get a lot of like clones, and then you get like you get Doom, and then you get the deathmatch circuit that creates off that, and a lot of the mods, and then a lot of other games that are playing off of that. And there are some interesting things like Ultima and whatnot, but then you get System Shock that completely upends what the genre can do. And then you kind of do that for a little while, and the basic shooters, and I don't mean basic in an insulting way, kind of come back in vogue, and then something more story-driven comes out again, and that just kind of keeps going that way.
Oh yeah, the line you can connect between System Shock to Half-Life to BioShock, which unfortunately doesn't get any coverage with this documentary. Like, again, it's amazing how cyclical this stuff is.
Yeah, it is a bummer because, again, this is 4.5 hours long. They cover a lot of topics and they can't get everything. There's like over 50 games that get shout outs in this documentary, but they can't hit it all. And so some fan favorites get left by the wayside. BioShock is one of my absolute all-time favorites. So that not even getting mentioned, that was so sad. It's cool that Team Fortress 2 gets a little bit of time in the sun. We mentioned Time Splitters. Time Splitters 2 is one of my all-time favorite multiplayer games. Same. So anytime people say the words Time Splitters, I'm jumping for joy. So you get a little bit of a mixed bag where even with 4.5 hours, you're going for the breadth of the genre instead of really depth into it. So you can't do like 40 minutes just on the Halo games. You got to kind of move past those, and maybe something like Turok only gets 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed that console shooters kind of got the shaft, and mostly we just had their own little segment towards the end, because there were a lot of console shooters that were very essential, like stepping stones in FPS history outside of just GoldenEye and Halo.
Yeah, and just I don't know. I'm still puzzled by the lack of BioShock, Metroid Prime, like a big Nintendo franchise going FPS.
Mm-hmm.
Even like Doom 3, obviously, but I understand maybe not wanting to like keep talking about it at that point. But it's weird, like even in the context of the documentary, Deus Ex was just that first game.
Yeah, sometimes like they didn't even touch on Portal 2 at all, which is strange. Portal 1 obviously redefined the genre, but that's insane to me to not even mention Portal 2. So sometimes some of these games really only get one entry, which is...
Yeah, relegating the orange box to its own entry just by itself was maybe a mistake. You could have gotten whole segments out of each of those releases.
Yeah.
I'm only half joking when I say I want a whole documentary about the Team Fortress 2 hat economy. You could do it. You could do it. It wouldn't be that hard.
Get on that no clip.
I would have really liked Modern Warfare having its own section too, because I know it's easy to kind of dunk on the way the military shooters got very oversaturated, but a lot of those early ones are incredibly important to like what gaming is, and they're fascinating games in of themselves. It wasn't until like Infinite Warfare and all this other stuff where they became brainless Michael Bay
parodies of themselves.
Yeah. Battlefield 1941 in particular was kind of a big deal that was immediately forgotten about when it was overshadowed by bigger games that followed it. But hell, there would be no Fortnite without Battlefield 1941. That gave us arena shooters, essentially.
Yeah. It's weird we got footage of like Apex Legends, and we only see like a 5-second clip of BioShock, but maybe there's an actual explanation for that. I don't know. I'm sure they went out to a great many people who didn't have interest. I mean, obviously we barely have anybody from the Half-Life team to discuss Half-Life.
It amazes me that Half-Life is like fucking Minecraft now. It officially comes from space. That game just fell from the sky one day, made by the Valve. Like the big baby face from the end of the Matrix Revolution somehow coughed it into being.
Saying that, I mean, avoiding talking about that stuff let us, hear a lot about Blood, which excited me. Hearing Quake 2 go, Quake 2 is actually a really good game.
Totally.
Sin talked about.
Dark Forces made me very happy.
Dark Forces being in there was pretty deal. Cool. Yeah,
specifically talking about the appeal of Dark Forces being the first time you were actually inside a Star Wars universe, which is a big deal in gaming and transmedia in general.
Yeah.
Pretty much every Star Wars game after Dark Forces was building on Dark Forces. So seeing that get love and its place in history acknowledged was really nice.
Republic Commando is very much like a spiritual successor to Dark Forces for me. Seeing Fear get highlighted, I mean, I know that's like been a series and all that, but seriously, everyone needs to respect Fear a lot more.
Well, that was one of those I was going to bring up. That's cool they mentioned Fear because obviously it's a series, but I never thought of it as like a major player in the same way as, a Halo or a Half-Life or Call of Duty. It's there, but I feel like it's probably more of a cult status thing. But it's still great to have Fear pop up. I love that they got some of the less talked about franchises a little bit of time.
That's why I was very excited to hear Prey talked about. I would have liked to have seen that highlighted more. And I mean, I'm obviously because it's one of my favorite games, so I'm being, but Prey did so much for the genre without anyone really discussing it, especially the time it came out. I think Prey really pushed forward like what a first-person shooter kind of narrative could do, especially like on a console, more so than other things around it. Because there obviously were things that really pushed narratives, even like Doom 3 on a console. But it was never really received that well. While Prey was, and then Prey was also kind of like left to, I mean, that you look up what happened to Prey 2 and how that eventually became Prey, which has nothing to do with Prey.
Oh god, speaking of another game like that, I was so happy to see Unreal spotlighted.
Yes.
Because that's a game that was like immediately overshadowed by both Unreal Tournament and the Unreal Engine, and nobody ever talks about the fact that the very first Unreal is a really creative, cool game that meant a lot whenever it first came out.
Yeah. In the annals of video game history, Cliffy B popped out of nowhere and made Gears of War and nothing beforehand. It's very strange how Unreal is completely passed over. Unreal Champions was something I played hours upon hours of.
I'm a little surprised, and this, I guess, shouldn't be too surprising considering they already have enough in the documentary. It'd be hard to cram in more focus. But to me, I was... the essential part of all this should be like discussing LAN parties, and they didn't really touch upon that to the same degree I would have expected. Like, you think they would have at least had a couple commentators talking about, like, all the nights they sat around connecting Xboxes and just playing like Left 4 Dead together until 4 a.m. at a buddy's house.
They combined
it
a little bit with the esports.
Yeah. I mean, both of those are really big things and probably separate documentaries, but it's so entwined with first-person shooters, you think like, wow, that should almost just be a segment by itself.
Yeah, I guess I'd be curious to learn about like how do they break down the narrative of the documentary? Like, what are you exactly trying to discuss with FPS? Are you just like, were you just going in to discuss how the genre itself in the annals of video game history was born and then altered until the modern age. Because then, you can't really take these huge tangents off to the side.
Because the structure they're using, I guess we're reviewing this, should probably go into some of the details. The structure they're using is mostly laying this out chronologically. First section's in the beginning, and it talks about stuff like Maze War. Then it jumps to big fucking games, and these are the Wolfenstein, Doom, System Shock, really classic monumental games. And then there's a whole section on Attack of the Doom clones. So you get all the things that were basically, hey, Doom was pretty cool. We should try our own hand at Doom. Then a section on Polygon Crazy, kind of the evolution of 3D gaming. But then it gets a little murkier because there's first-person story, and then we have the coverage of Unreal, Sin, Trespasser, Half-Life, arena gaming, the next level, and then like a legacy section at the end. So it's trying to move through all these games chronologically, which is
mostly,
yeah. It's not entirely.
It's
that
weird
way,
they talked about Borderlands and then the military shooter.
Right.
It would have made sense in the opposite, because I think that's what made Borderlands so special and why everyone was like, oh, it's going to crash whenever it comes out. And it did the exact opposite.
Yeah. I mean, we get to stuff like Half-Life 2 and Portal and all that with about a half hour left in the documentary. So it's unfortunate they get to the end and they have to speed through current stuff. As a history, it makes sense, right? We're living through all these other games. We don't necessarily have to talk about what just came out. But it still feels very weird where it's like Half-Life 2 isn't even that new anymore. Like, that's actually got a lot of history on it. You think that'd be an area where you'd want to expend a lot of time talking.
Yeah.
And is revolutionary. Like, Half-Life 2 is a huge chunk of gaming history at this point.
Oh, yeah. I remember just when that came out, how people were freaking out about, like the physics engine and just how scary the Ravenholm level is. They touch on that. They definitely talk about it in the episode, but I'm biased because I feel like, man, Half-Life 2 to me seems so monumental. I don't know how you talk about anything else in that era for 5 minutes and not spend 20 minutes on Half-Life 2.
I wonder how much they were hampered by just who they could get.
Yeah. And most of these too, most of the documentaries from these guys get sequels. And, In Search of Darkness was just a decade of horror movies, and that got 3. So I would not be surprised in any capacity if they came back and they did an FPS 2 and maybe redid some of these areas or talked a little bit more in depth on the sequels or some of the pieces that just got passed over.
Yeah, that's why, as much as I enjoyed this, and I could have watched this go on for like another 2.5, 3 hours. I can just listen to video game people talk about video games, especially this particular stuff, forever. But to that point, I would think it would have actually worked better if they had split it up more into like, okay, let's take like In the Beginning and Big Fucking Games and do that as like a part 1 documentary. Like just take that and extend that out to like 4 hours and then go like from there or something.
Yeah, just covering from Doom to Half-Life could have been an entire 5-hour documentary in and of itself that would cover like an entire chapter of game history.
For sure.
I like how we say this though, and it's like, but are we going to give them like millions of dollars to do that?
Yeah,
I'm poor. I'm dirt poor.
Well, as long as we're talking about the money thing here, we can probably wrap up by just going through the different tiers that are available. So again, if people are interested in getting a copy of First Person Shooter, you can go to fpsdoc.com. Pledges are open until the end of August 1st. There's a bunch of different tiers available. They actually have physical copies, which I love. Too often these days, it feels like a lot of times things are just physical or digital copies. So you can get a standard package, which includes the Blu-ray and a digital copy. That's $100. There's a big box Blu-ray edition that seems to come with multiple posters, t-shirts. I'm assuming you get to shake John Romero's hand or something at that point. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. They do have
John
a digital...
Carmack actually shows up and steals your car.
He takes it and drives off, and you just have to wave. I paid for this.
Welcome to video games. I don't know why I made him Rob Liefeld.
There's a digital version of the movie. If you don't want all of the extra doodads, that's $49. The digital delivery is going to be at the end of August. And then if you're Mr. Moneybags, you can become a producer on the documentary. They have an associate producer spot that's $1,500, a regular producer spot for $3,500. I gave up looking for houses recently, so maybe I'll just spend my housing down payment on becoming an executive producer.
Do it.
$6,000, but I could go around with business cards that say I am an executive producer.
Probably be on IMDb.
Hopefully, before the physical release, they'll come out with this one's equivalent of the Elvira edition of In Search of Darkness. And it's just Billy Mitchell posed sexily on a couch.
Billy Mitchell Boudoir. That's really what we're aiming for. I don't see that tier available.
Quick, type that into Midjourney.
Yeah. Oh no.
Can there
this
be
is why
Scott
people are striking us
edition?
AI.
I would like to see that.
What does any of this have to do with cheating Robo?
But if even if you're like not into video games or FPSs, it's just, I think, a really good and really fascinating history documentary, like on technology, or it's just it's a really interesting story to follow, even if you know nothing about video games.
It's very fun when you start with, like the maze game, and they're just showing you how revolutionary it was to be able to draw the lines of a square and then rotate that. And then 4 hours later, you have something like Halo 3 and just the absolute jumps and bounds they've made over 30, 40 years of gaming history. All that compressed together, you really realize, like, wow, we have come a long way very fast.
To put it bluntly, this documentary has a lot of guts.
Big guts?
Big guts.
I'm so tempted to just close my laptop and go walk into the sea.
Do you live near the sea?
No, well, technically, Lake Superior is an inland sea. It would take me several days to walk there, though, so I'd be exhausted before I could even drown
I would
myself.
appreciate the moxie of a several-day hike to drown yourself.
After one groaner joke, yes, that's how committed to the opposite of this bit I am.
Now that's what I call having a handful of vertebrae and a head full of mad.
Mike, you're going to have to apologize for that joke by doing the John Romero Easter egg where, like, you record yourself in reverse and put it over the credits of this episode. I can take a hint. Anyways, no. Folks, if you want to hear more of Box Office Pulp, you can always find us online wherever you get your podcast from. We're on Spotify. Not Stitcher. I don't know why I'm angry at Stitcher. Yeah,
Stitcher never existed. Stitcher died 10 years ago.
We don't upload from there. Not Stitcher, but you can find us on all the other major platforms that are still alive.
I'm just imagining the chocolate dude from SpongeBob, and he's just running out screaming, Stitcher!
Yeah, you get the point. I don't even want to do the rest of the roundup at this point. You get it. You can find First Person Shooter on fpsdoc.com. Go check it out. Thank you very much for the time. This has been Bop. Get the hell out of here.
This is Box Office Pulp Guy, and this has been a Pulp Podcast production. Now please, 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 put a gun in my mouth and pull the trigger and say goodnight.
And now, on with the show.